right. My clock says 7:02, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. For all you who've joined us, welcome. Really appreciate you being here. If you're wondering if you're in the right place, there's the title of what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm Dave Sly, Water Quality Program Director for Wild Virginia, and excited about this project that we're working on and that we think you can help us on. I'll say if any of you had registered for a previous version of this, sorry that that had to be canceled. I had some family emergency, but it's still timely. In fact, kind of the time frame has shifted a little bit, so you haven't missed anything, and there's still plenty of time to get this information and to use it. And before I go further, I want to thank Kylie and Layla for being here, my colleagues at Wild Virginia, who are going to try to keep me from getting into any big trouble here. And thanks to you guys. So here we go. Little logistics. We are recording this, and the recording will be available later. So everybody who registered will get that. And please feel free to share the links to that. You'll get that and probably some other information in the follow-up email. If you want, here at the very beginning, a lot of times I encourage people to, introduce themselves in chat. And I'll say in this occasion, maybe give me any information or us all some information. Have you had problems with sediment pollution? Have you seen, incidents where your streams were getting polluted and whatever kind of thing like that? I'd be interested to see some of that. Go ahead during the program and pose questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end. Now, my little commercial for Wild Virginia. We need folks like you to support us always. We're a small group that, frankly, we accomplish a lot, but we couldn't do it without members and supporters. We have two programs. My program, which is the water quality, and you see there we work on pipelines and PFAS and other kinds of issues. The other side is our habitat connectivity program. And that works on basically trying to make passageways for animals and people so we don't collide with each other, so that animals, ecosystems can work, animals can be safe, and we can have the benefit of those resources. Um, the highlighted thing there is very timely, and I'm going to get to that at the end, but there's this Clean Water Advocates program that I want to tell you a little bit more about. There's an opportunity right there at this moment to get involved in that, but I'll get to that later. And then finally, we have lots of these kinds of programs. Sometimes they're very practical things that we are working on as Wild Virginia, but there's a wide range of other topics. We had one a while back on migratory fish, and we've had them on all kinds of issues. So once you're on our list, keep track of those. And I think wherever your interests lie, you'll probably find something that's interesting. Plus, we have a book club. And so if you're a big reader, you can get involved in that. Um, so this is kind of the layout of how I'm going to go through this program. We think there's a serious problem with sediment pollution, and we have a plan for trying to do something about it, which we think you can help us with. And then at the end, as I said, I'm going to hit on that Clean Water Advocates program. So the problem is that sediment is a major pollutant throughout Virginia. Streams, reservoirs, the Chesapeake Bay all have very significant problems with sediment pollution, and this is nothing new. Frankly, water quality problems caused by sediment has been something we've known about, that had been documented, and it's been serious since well before the Clean Water Act was passed 50 some years ago. And there are some tools to deal with it. And unfortunately, we're not using all those tools. and we can add some that we need to do now, and that's what we really want to work on, what I want to talk about mostly tonight. Now, one of the tools that is available now and should be enacted is what we call narrative water quality criteria. I'll talk about that a little later. And then another tool is numeric water quality criteria. We don't have those to address sediment, and that's kind of the biggest focus right now. So just to describe a little bit the magnitude of the problem that we know we have with sediment pollution, in its latest statewide water quality assessment, which the draft 2026 version just came out a couple days ago, uh, they predict, based on statewide kind of predictive monitoring, that 31% or more of our wadeable streams already are probably impacted. The habitats are already affected negatively by deposition of sediments. So it's not just what's in the water column, but it's falling out. It's marring, those habitats where a lot of the animals need to get their food. A lot of them live in those bottom areas, and it's a very serious problem when you cause damage to that habitat. That 31% is from a population of stream miles that's pretty huge. So if you, by my calculations, what we're talking about there is more than 12,000 stream miles that could be negatively affected, which just kind of blows your mind. That it's that extensive. Um, and DEQ admits that when they're looking at things that cause problems for the biological communities, things they call stressors, that sediment is the biggest one, the one they know is the most prevalent. Um, Another thing that they do is we have a biological monitoring program. The DEQ looks at certain streams and assesses the benthic invertebrates, basically the small critters who live there. And when they find that those biological systems are damaged, they come up with what are called total maximum daily limits, which are pollution control plans. And there are many of those that need to be established, but they've already developed them for over 1,100 miles of streams. So again, you can see that the magnitude of what we're looking at here. I said 1,100, I mean 1,100. Don't want to overstate it. But the magnitude is pretty huge. And again, the problem with those specifically is they've already looked at the biological communities and found that they're damaged. We're supposed to prevent that, not wait till it happens and then try to do something about it. Um, so those narrative and numeric criteria that I mentioned, they all fall under our responsibilities under the Clean Water Act and state law, and they're contained in something called our water quality standards. Every state has a set of water quality standards that has several parts, but they are intended to meet this objective that's laid out for the Clean Water Act to restore and maintain the integrity of our waters. That means to keep them working as ecosystems that support aquatic life, that support our uses, the things that we have a right to do and want to do with our waters. So if we're not meeting those objectives or that objective, all parts of it, then our water quality standards aren't working. So the three parts of the standards include designated uses, and all of Virginia's waters are designated so that they're supposed to support all the kinds of native aquatic life that should be there. And so that's a pretty high standard. They're also supposed to support recreational uses. And that can include swimming and fishing and boating and all those things. But frankly, it just includes the fact that we have a right to beautiful streams. The aesthetic value is part of that recreational use. Um, so that's the first part. And then the water quality criteria, both kinds that I mentioned, are supposed to help maintain those uses. They're supposed to kind of draw a line, a threshold below which you're not going to be able to support those uses. And so those criteria are really important. The third part of the standards is called anti-degradation, and it just says, again, you don't wait till waters are messed up, to be technical. You look ahead and you try to find the ones where you still have good quality and you maintain that. So jump right into the narrative criteria. As I say, if the narrative criteria are met, then we're supposed to have good water quality. We're supposed to be able to exercise all those uses. In the general sense, as it says, narrative, it's kind of written out a description as to what we want to have maintained. The first is that you cannot interfere with those designated uses for, swimming and aquatic life, but also other things like a public water supply. A lot of our water gets drawn out of rivers and streams, and sediment and other pollutants can cause a problem for those. Um, and one of the things that that narrative criteria specifically calls out is things like turbidity, which is an indicator of sediment pollution, color, which is often a result of sediment pollution. And I'll show you a photograph that kind of illustrates that. And materials that settle to the bottom. So as I said earlier, DEQ admits that there are plenty of places where these sediments have settled to the bottoms and are causing us problems. So those narrative water quality criteria are really important, and they are supposed to be in effect right now. We're supposed to be enforcing them fully. But the fact is that DEQ is refusing to do that in many instances. When they set a permit limit for a construction site or any other kind of discharge, those narrative criteria are supposed to be part of the analysis. Will the conditions of this permit uphold those uses and uphold those kinds of conditions that we're promising will do? Um, Also, when it comes to projects that are already underway, are they violating those criteria? And if they are, then that should be part of the enforcement action that you acknowledge those violations and do something about it. Um, but again, as I said before, we do look at situations where the biological communities are already degraded, and they will admit that those are problems, but that's too late. That's after we've already seen all this sediment washing in and interfering with and harming the habitats. That's not the issue. That's not the way we're supposed to do it. And these are just three examples of places where, to my mind, I kind of defy anybody to tell me that these situations uphold our designated uses, that these are places that you can or would ever want to recreate, that these are places where the aquatic life are not harmed. The fact is, these are all places, these are photographs from DEQ, by the way, and these are places that they knew about, that they documented, but not in any of these places did they ever admit that water quality standards were violated. Not one. And I mentioned the color issue. Look at that one on the left. Just look at that picture and think about, how do you justify not applying those narrative criteria? Um, and I will say that we're way behind in that aspect. West Virginia, our neighbors, who aren't necessarily always known as the most stringent environmental regulators, they actually do enforce their narrative water quality criteria for sediments. They have a standard that essentially says if you have visible turbidity, visible sediments and solids in the water caused by discharge, that you violated their standards. and yet we're stuck with this approach from DEQ. So we need to look. We're going to continue to insist that DEQ actually enforces narrative criteria. We're not going to stop on that. But like I say, another layer of protection is these numeric water quality criteria. And really both of them should be part of the picture. Sometimes you don't need to go do a sample or do a measurement of how much sediment. Like I say, if you see those kinds of images I just showed you, I don't need I don't need a technical analysis to know that that's a problem. But in other cases, it would be useful and it'd be appropriate to do sampling and to decide how much sediment, how many solids are there. So both of them should work together. Um, the good thing about numeric criteria when you establish them is it really just makes it easier on a broad scale to set permit limits and to assess whether your criteria, whether your standards are violated. Again, the narrative criteria are important, but it leaves a little room for objectivity. Or so, yeah, subjectivity. I got it backwards. Uh, And so that leaves room for debate. I might say in some circumstances the narrative criteria are violated. Might have to argue about that. When you got the numeric criteria, it's much easier to be clear and to be consistent. So it makes sense to do that where you can. Now, I say here, where is it? An important supplement where possible. The reason I say that is that we know some pollutants we're not prepared to set numeric criteria. We don't know enough or we don't have the time. For example, PFAS, which we work on while Virginia is heavily involved in, there's more than 10,000 kinds of PFAS. And we're never going to get to the point where we have 10,000 plus separate numeric criteria for each of those chemicals. So that makes those narrative criteria even more important in some circumstances. The thing, though, with sediment and the problems that they cause, as I say, we've known about them forever. And we do know a lot about what levels of sediment are a problem. So there's no reason not to go forward with the numeric criterion now. And we believe, and we will be arguing, that the state not only should, but that they're legally required to go forward with this now. And frankly, the State Water Control Board, which is the regulatory body that makes regulations for water in the state. If you don't know, that's a seven-member board, people who are nominated by the governor. They have staggered terms so that you'll have members now, which were from the last governor and this governor and maybe the next one. And they have the responsibility to decide whether regulations are appropriate, whether we need new regulations. And way back in 2019, some of those members said, hey, we see that the controls for sediment pollution don't seem to be working. And they asked DEQ, why is that? DEQ kind of said, well, because we don't have numeric criteria. So they said, okay, go develop some and do it quickly. Do it on an expedited basis. That was 2019. DEQ began a process in that direction, and that essentially died in 2021, and we've never heard any indication that DEQ intends to restart it anytime soon. So we're not willing to wait any longer. That's to us, frankly, to me, those water board members should be a little bit angry that their instruction to DEQ has apparently been ignored or disregarded. And they all should be embarrassed by the fact that we're now 7 years on and haven't made that progress. So, what are we going to do about it? Like I say, our patience is over. Now what we want to do, or what we're going to do, is submit what's called a petition for rulemaking to that water control board. And we want to recruit people like you and others to join us in making that case. Um, that petition for rulemaking is a formal process. It is allowed for under our Virginia Administrative Process Act, which is what kind of guides all the regulatory structure and how you go about things. It specifically allows for parties, a group like ours or individuals, to bring to the decision-making body a proposal. Hey, we want this new regulation, or we want this regulation to be changed, or even abolished. And if that happens, if you go about that the right way, then the deciding body, in this case, the water board, they have to take that forward. It will be submitted to something called the Register of Regulations. Under law, it has to be, and it will get a 21-day comment period after that. Now, a lot of times when we have these kind of sessions to tell people about submitting comments, we wait until we're in that comment period. But a lot of times that period's a good bit longer, 30 or 60 days, in some cases even. So the fact that it's 21 days, that's pretty short, and especially in the middle of the summer when people maybe aren't paying as much attention. So we decided to go ahead and get a jump on this. Now, um, after that public notice runs, the period runs through, the board has to address it at one of its future meetings. So it's the kind of thing, we're not just bringing it up and having them ignore us. They can't ignore us under this circumstance. They might not agree with us, but at least they have to look at it. They have to give their rationale as to what they're going to do and why. So we intend to file this petition by the end of this month. And under the way the rules work, we expect that it would likely be, the public comment period would likely start on July 13th. Now, I can't even guarantee that because there are some moving parts that we don't control, but that's the likelihood. So what that means is that us talking about it now means we get a jump on that. You get some kind of prior notice. Um, and we have the time to recruit even more people between now and then. Um, that petition and then public comments, we'll file the petition, and then we'll, along with everybody else, we'll have the chance to even expand on what we've put in the petition. And we're ready for that. We have legal arguments. We have some really good technical reports that talk about why this is necessary, and maybe as important, how to go about the process. We're not just saying to the water board and to DEQ, go do it, figure it out. We have spent time and done a technical analysis to figure out the best way to do it. Now, the details of going through that process, can be debated and determined. But the fact is that there are good methods out there. Other people have done this. So we know how to do it, and we're going to put that forward as well. Um, One other thing that happens is once that regulatory process starts, the agency will draw together what they call an advisory panel or a technical review panel. And while Virginia will absolutely be involved in that process. So this is not just a one-shot deal where we submit something and then just sit back and wait for it to happen. So once we've done that, once we're done here tonight, um, what can you do and how can you help? And I'll say that it's great for us to submit something, but to get a good representative sample of people from around the state to say, yeah, we think that's important also, is a big part of this. Um, you know, those water control board members are citizens like us. They're our neighbors. They're people from all walks of life, in all parts of the state. And so they're not, some of them have some technical or legal background, but they do pay attention to people, in their neighborhoods, in their counties, their localities. And so that's why it's really important to have your voices involved. But we don't leave you kind of on your own to just figure it out. Um, as I say, you'll get follow-up to this, but as we get closer to the real chance to do the comments, we're going to give you help and guidance. We're pretty much used to doing that in a lot of circumstances. So we'll give you the nuts and bolts of when and where and how to submit the comments, but also, ideas on what to include. And we always want your personal kind of slant on things, why it's important to you, and anything you know about your streams or your water bodies. But at least we can help you put it in a context. Um, One thing that I think would be really useful, and it goes back to what I suggested at the beginning, was tell us about your experiences with dirt in streams and lakes and so on. Tell us about, the fact that if you have experience with this kind of pollution, why it matters to you. Has it impacted water bodies that you wanted to use and then you decided I can't do that, or the beautiful stream that's supposed to be flowing by your vacation cabin and it's nasty. Tell us about those things because again, those individual stories, those personal values are part of this whole picture. And as I say, you're supposed to be able to use your waters. And if one of those streams that I showed the photos of was in your backyard, would you consider that an interference with your uses? I think most people would. And the other thing is, I know a lot of people because I get contacted by people on a fairly regular basis saying, hey, I've got this problem over here. Hey, this big development site is dumping dirt into this creek. Um, and if you come across those kinds of things, take some photos, include those with your comments. So you can play a role with this heads up. You can think about are there places, are there situations like that you can really contribute details. And then finally, when we get all the way through the commenting process and when it comes time for the State Water Control Board to make a decision, it can be helpful to get people to show up at those meetings. Now, I'm not going to promise you that going to one of those meetings is an exciting event. It's usually not. But again, it shows them that people are dedicated to an issue. And to have any significant number of folks to show up and say, yes, we want this to happen, can make an impact. So that's kind of part of the picture that I am encouraging, asking folks to help us with, because we're going to push this thing forward and we want to get a good result. Um, the last thing you can do is you can it's I'll make my bald-faced kind of appeal. Support us, help us. We do this every day. We love doing it. I can tell you this is my dream job, and you allow me to do it because you help us survive as an organization. And so keep a lookout. Now that you're on an email list, since you registered, you'll know about other webinars, but also kind of action alerts on this issue and on other issues. We are very experienced at letting you know when something's happening, when some kind of action is going to be really useful. Um, and then to the last part of my presentation, which is separate from the kind of sediment issue, but related. We have this program called Clean Water Advocates that we started. We're beginning to have our fourth year of classes this fall. It's been a great success. What we teach people is kind of part of what I've talked about tonight, but in more detail is what's the legal and the regulatory basis for how decisions should be made. And then, how do you actually get involved and how do you be effective at an advocate, whether it's on your local level, on a statewide issue, a legislative issue, whatever it happens to be. We think we're able to give people some really usable information and skills. And, the folks who've been through the process or through the program the last 3 years have told us that they think it's a really worthwhile thing to have done. We've so far graduated more than 60 people from this program, and we're excited about this time. So please feel free to apply. Um, we're we're looking for a lot of good people, and the really important part is you don't have to have any specific background in this area. You don't have to be a lawyer or a scientist or ever have submitted comments in the past or showed up at a hearing. That's okay. If you have, great. But if you haven't, as long as you have a little bit of interest and some passion to try to make things better, then we want you. So please apply. And again, you'll get information about how to apply in the follow-up email. Excuse me. Um, and there's my information. Um, and now we'll take questions, and I'm going to stop sharing. So. Maybe Layla, can you tell me if we've got any good questions hanging out there?
Yeah, I see one in the Q&A box. Someone's asking, from what industries or types of companies and practices does this sediment come from? And then, are there any practices we can employ in our daily lives to reduce our potential impact?
Good question. Well, first of all, anybody who's out there breaking ground, anybody who's doing development, construction, um, could be contributing to sediment pollution. Now, there are ways that they can try to control runoff and sediment coming off their sites. And if those are done really thoroughly and faithfully, then they can have a really good impact. But again, those are things that the DEQ, that the state is supposed to be making sure work. The fact is that sometimes when people they call the pollution control methods best management practices. And if you've driven around your neighborhood or your community and you've seen a construction site, you've seen the little fences, we call them silt fences, and other things that are meant to keep the sediment from going off the site. Well, sometimes people use those, sometimes they don't do them well. But sometimes even if they put them in place, we know that they don't necessarily work as well as they should. So some other level of improvements need to be made. And that's where these water quality standards can really help drive that improvement instead of just, kind of assuming that those practices are going to protect our waters and our uses. There's supposed to be a real follow-up to that. Now, construction is not the only thing. Certainly, sediment comes off of farms and forestry operations. And you know, we're all part of that in one way or the other. And certainly if in your neighborhood, in your area, you're seeing things like that are happening. You're seeing mud flowing off sites or off of properties. Your local government usually has or does have inspectors. And you can figure out how to contact them and get them to go out there and try to figure out what's going on. The state DEQ also has inspectors that respond to complaints like that. And then, of course, just on the personal level, if you're going to be doing any kind of digging, any kind of activity that might cause some sediment release, do it carefully and use the right kind of protections. So hopefully that answers that one.
think you covered everything there. Looks like another person, you kind of answered this already, but asking about regulations for farmers irrigating from a stream that would work up sediment. Is that allowed, or are there different regulations that are followed there?
There are things that are supposed to be done to keep it from causing that kind of problem. Obviously, it's a valid use to take water from a stream for your cattle or your crops or whatever else, but it should be done in a way that's not causing problem for the next person downstream. So yes, that's supposed to be dealt with.
Someone's also asking, wondering if Wild Virginia is advocating at all against data centers.
We are involved with a lot of other people. We haven't had kind of a separate campaign for that, but we're definitely in a larger group that's drawing a lot of concern about how those are managed and whether in some places they should be allowed at all. Um, so, and to be honest, what those are on some scale is huge construction sites in some cases. So when we talk about implementing the right controls on construction sites, there's just a big and a pretty blatant example of that. So to that extent, when we can get the standards applied correctly and we can get the regulations working regularly or correctly, then that's going to affect data centers as well as a lot of other projects.
Looks like we have one last question. This one's a little open-ended, but
Okay.
asking for thoughts on the current drought.
Uh, yeah, that's very open. And I mean, first of all, what goes along with droughts as the climate changes is also much more intense and heavier storms on the other end of the scale. And so both of those are dangerous. Both of those are problematic for water supplies. And again, frankly, we helped create this this situation. We've always had droughts. We would always have droughts, but they are getting worse. And water levels, I've seen photos here recently of the Rappahannock River last year in places where it should have been covered with water and it looked like puddles. I've seen similar situations in a lot of other streams. And frankly, that makes these kinds of protections even more vital because as your streams get, more impacted by temperature and by low flows, you can't afford to dump even more on them. That makes it even more urgent. Um, do we have anything else? I'm looking in chat to see what's over there too. Um, well, hello to all you folks who have spoken up. Glad you're here. Um, okay. Well, um, I'll give you a couple minutes. I'm trying to think if there's anything I can throw in while I wait to see if anybody else wants to jump in. I'll just say that, again, this is a little different circumstance from the way we usually do this, in that this is so far ahead of the actual comment period. But don't think it's just going to go away. This is going to go forward in the near future, and we can definitely help or use your help. Um, but we're excited to take this measure. This is long overdue in our view, and it is important that we kind of try to make those guys do the job that they agreed to do. So um, anyway, I don't see anything else popping up. But stay tuned. You'll get the follow-up email. And if you haven't looked at the Clean Water Advocates program, take a look and see if it might fit you. Um, I'll tell you what, in looking at the applicants so far, I'm just frankly amazed at the range of people and where all these folks come from as far as their backgrounds and education and interest. So in part, you'd have to listen to me some, not every time. We get good guest speakers, real experts on different issues, but you'd also get to learn from the folks you're in class with. We're going to have a lot of really interaction with the other folks in the class. So the fact that it's a real kind of diverse and really interesting bunch of people will make that better for all of us. So, but with that, I guess we can say good night. Thank you again for being here, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.